How's it going, everyone? Sunyveil here. There's just two quick things that I want to share with you before we get started with episode 7 of FECast with Chicityshogun. Unfortunately, Chi-City's microphone didn't cooperate with us the best during the recording of this podcast, but you'll still be able to get the idea of what he's saying, and I don't think that there's a ton of meaning lost in what was eaten up by the microphone gremlins of the internet. On a much happier note, the other thing I'd like to share with you is that Friends of Eternal merchandise is now available. If you want your own Friends of Eternal t-shirt or hoodie, you can get it on Inked Gaming. And I'll include a link to where you can purchase this in the description on SoundCloud and YouTube. Alternatively, if you just go in the Friends of Eternal Discord and look under team announcements, there's a pin post with a few great photos of me modeling the gear and also a link to how you can purchase it for yourself. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get started with episode 7 of FECast with Chicityshogun. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of FECast, the official podcast of Friends of Eternal. I am honored to be joined by Chicityshogun. How are you doing?
I'm good. What's up, everybody?
We have a great show for you this week. We have so much to talk about, from the ECQ coming up this weekend and what deck we think is the deck to beat. We have a meta breakdown for decks that we expect to do well, decks that we expect to be popular, and decks that we expect to be competitors. Also, there have been a bunch of spoilers this week that we can talk about it, and also, finally, the Sunny's Not Having It segment is going to be talking about spoilers as a community commodity. So, first of all, Chicityshogun, the people out there might not know who you are. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
So, let me just kind of talk about where I'm at by talking a little bit about you and what's going on with Friends of Eternal and how much I appreciate it. It's been so good for folks, I would guess, in a similar position as me, where we really like to play and play a lot, but don't have any kind of monster results. So where our place was and how to find a team and, how to find folks to test with and look at deck lists with and that sort of thing. And so Friends of Eternal has been really great for me to be able to have that and to look at lists before tournaments that aren't just on Eternal Warcry and have access to you and other really awesome folks like Ilya and Grimfam and Noverb and all the folks who are on there. So thanks so much for all the positive energy and for the community spirit and all you're doing. That's been helpful to me, and I would guess for a lot of folks.
Well, it makes me really happy to hear you say that. That is pretty much the exact goal I had in mind when I designed the team and launched it, and I hope that it's helping a lot of other people that are in your position, so I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. You're the man. Appreciate it. Eternal-wise, I live in the Bay Area in California, although as I grew up in the greater Chicagoland area. I actually grew up in suburb called Oak Park. It's the first suburb west of Chicago. And I'm probably a little bit older than most of the folks who play Eternal, I would guess. I'm turning 40 this year, which is a little hard to wrap my mind around. But in Vegas, the first weekend of October to celebrate. Anyone's welcome if you're free and want to pop over to Vegas that weekend.
Well, you heard it here. If you are looking for a party, you know where to go.
Professionally, I work as the executive director of a nonprofit which helps set up debate teams and competitions for inner city students. It's called the Bay Area Urban Debate League, or BAUDL, BAUDL. I've spent most of my life being involved with competitive policy debate. I debated all throughout high school and college, and most of my jobs have been debate coaching jobs. I coached at Smith and the University of Texas while I was getting my master's degree, Northwestern, and then for the last 9 years before I got this BAUDL job, I was the director of the debate program at UC Berkeley and was there for a long time. I think there's a lot of great overlap between debate and competitive card games. I would guess maybe even a bunch of folks playing Eternal have some background in debate. I know Loco Pojo is a debater. I think I heard him mention that on stream, and I've sort of been meaning at some point to reach out and talk with him further.
I actually did debate for a couple of years in high school. I did Lincoln Douglas debate. I don't know that it helped me much. I don't know. I feel like I'm very bad at presenting arguments and I think that my thought process is fine, but explaining it, I always feel like I have a lot of difficulty with it, and I was never any good at debate. But maybe it helped me from being an absolute hopeless case. Who knows?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not exact. Certainly, some of the persuasion, public speaking part is a little bit different, but I think it's really interesting to think about some of the strategy stuff. And there's a lot of kind of predicting what argument your opponent is going to say, and then they say this, and then I say that, and also I think picking winning lines is similar as well. So, in debate, instead of influence or units as your resources, like your resource is time a lot of the time, because if you're giving a 9 or 6 minute speech, you can only say so many things. So like in your earlier speeches, you'll introduce a set of arguments that give you different options. And then in your later speeches, you have to pick a path and narrow down your arguments to particular strategies that give yourself the best chance of winning. And so it's interesting to think about that in terms of resources in Eternal, and then, sort of try to narrow down to a winning strategy at the end. And I'm sort of hoping eventually to be able to introduce CCGs into the curriculum for students that are part of the program that I do, and use it as an educational tool.
All right, very cool. Do you ever see some of the arguments that are going on Reddit or in Discord or whatever and just shake your head? Or on the other hand, do you ever see some arguments and you think just, wow, that was very well laid out. Like this person did a very good job of, presenting their arguments and explaining their side of things? Or well, which is it?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, internet's a weird place, so a lot of what you see is kind of cringeworthy. But definitely once in a while, I'll see some things and be like, "Oh, that person would have been a really good debater." I always kind of have the recruiter mindset. But yeah, I get in there a little bit. Like I've only produced one piece of written content, and that was I wrote a thing for Neon in A Space, who to be as involved with as I used to be. Sorry, Neon, about cheating. And so I think that's been sort of interesting to see the debate about like what do we do in instances where people claim that they weren't cheating, but they were innocent, and relevant for Magic. If folks are following along Mythic Invitational, there is some big news about that.
Yeah, that is some really big news. I don't know how to respond to that. Seeing as this is an internal this is an internal podcast, we're going to stay out of what went on during the Mythic Invitational. But I mean, I don't know what to do about people that you hold in high regard being caught cheating, and whether they were really cheating with malicious intent, or if they were just unlucky in some way, or who knows what happened. Anyway,
and I, my article for Neon was sort of about thinking about that for digital card games and cheating scandal and Eternal yet, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how the community responds if something ever pops up. I feel like there were some of the ETS, maybe there are some folks who are doing some weird stuff and had to be removed, but super bummer if ever some of the top names, something funky comes out.
Yeah. All right, let's get into our show agenda for today. Well, one of the reasons I had you on is because you made the finals of the SPG tourney that happened yesterday, and you did it with Praxis Pledge. And I think that as a group, we think that Praxis Pledge is going to be the deck to beat this week. Tell us a little bit about your tournament.
Well, it was kind of a crazy day for me. So here I have a wife and a daughter, and so that makes it a little bit tough to play on the weekends. But it sort of looked, when I saw Paradox's post, that he was going to throw together a tournament that I might actually be able to do it. My mom was coming into town and she could help watch, so I worked it out. I was super excited. Although the day of, things went a little haywire. One of my first couple rounds I was about to start a match against Sono, it turned out there was kind of a family health issue. My wife needed to leave, and then I was responsible for taking my daughter to ballet. So I kind of had to tell Sono, hey, I'm so sorry, I'm in a rush, I have this match, and if it's not over, I'm going to concede to you. And he was very understanding. I kind of had to rush through the match, and Sono's a really great player, so he wrecked me, and I rush out the door and kind of think that the tournament isn't going to happen. But I got to ballet. My daughter's doing her thing, and see the next match has been paired, and Paradox, very understandably, has given me a game loss for being late. But it looks like Yurik Yu is still around, and we can play. And sorry, Yurik, for being a pain in the butt and being late. But I kind of pull out my phone at ballet. I haven't looked at deck lists or anything. I just sort of do it live on my phone and do well. I'm able to win those games and then win the next match at ballet and make the top 8. Out for ice cream, but GHP and Paradox were very nice and let me have a couple minutes. I get home. Mom takes over with the kid, and then I can really lock in on top 8, which is awesome.
All right, awesome. And you made it all the way to finals, where you lost to Huru Control, right?
And I was able to beat a couple of players who I have a huge amount of respect for. GHP, who is incredible, and I've actually gotten some coaching from before we played in the top 8, and Missing Toes, and they were both on FTP. And let me know if this is your experience, but the Praxis Pledge deck just felt awesome against FTP. Like, it was just really, really clicking, and especially in the top 4 against Missing Toes, just with the right draws, they weren't much of a game.
Yeah. I think it depends on the build of FTP as to how the Praxis Pledge does against it. Like, I think the Praxis Pledge deck is pretty weak to Hailstorm, and we'll talk a bit more about this later. But if the Genev deck is playing Hailstorm, I think that it could be a tough matchup. But I think if they're just playing a straight matchup with no sweepers, I think it's really good for Praxis.
Yeah, for sure. By the time they have kind of some of their bigger units out, this deck has got a Gunrunner and maybe a Daria, and then you're just kind of coming at them with quick draw deadly units, and even though their stuff is bigger, it's just kind of tough for them to come back.
Yeah, for sure.
So I ended up winning both of those matches 3-0, 3-0, and in the finals, MJ, who's on Huru Control, I got up, but kind of then lost the next 2, wasn't able to close it out, but had really interesting and enjoyable games, and that was pretty fun to go to a Game 5.
Yeah, so that Huru deck was the build that did well in the last ECQ, right? Was it card for card? I took a brief look at it, but I didn't check to make sure that all 80 cards were the same. Do you know if it was card for card the same deck from the ECQ?
I'm not sure, but yeah, just a lot of removal, and then kind of a couple that then could be targets for Palace. Defiance was pretty big in the early games.
Yeah, I actually don't think that that's a bad matchup for Praxis. I think that if the Hailstorms are main, then it can be tough. Anyway, we'll save the matchups for a bit later. Let's talk about this Pledge deck and what makes it so good. So this Praxis Pledge deck, it has almost exclusively units. You've got your Initiative Sands, Glasshopper, Teacher of Humility, Amaran Stinger, Aurelian Merchant, Sicolas, Daria, Sandstorm Titan, Gunrunner, Moonstone Vanguard, Heart of the Vault, Apex Predator, and just 4 torches as for spells in the main deck. In the market, you've got Glasshopper, Purify, this is actually a little different Drox version of it, Xena Initiation, Obelisk, Banner. I personally play a Dissociate in the market. So it's almost exclusively units in the main deck, and you have just a few utility cards in the market. And what's really cool about it is that your units can double as power at the beginning of the game because there are so many Pledge units, but also cards like Daria and Gunrunner also kind of act like spells. They affect the board the turn that you play them. They have an effect that helps your other units fight through. So this deck is incredibly consistent at curving out. So its draws, well, it just does the same thing every game. It accelerates out big units, whether that be via traditional accelerators such as Initiative Sands or Aurelian Merchant, or Glasshopper, which is insane in this deck. I think that Glasshopper is hands down the best card that you can draw in this deck.
So just a couple questions I wanted to ask you about pledging decision. Do you agree that you basically, of course you have to pledge, and that you just mulligan to pledge, and the situations in which you would accept a hand in which you're not pledging are almost none?
Correct. The hand has to be very, very good, knowing that your Glasshoppers and your Gunrunners are turned off in order to accept a hand that does not have a pledge in it.
Yeah, I especially Gunrunner, I feel like, are the games where you just sort of go nuts and thwomp people. Gunrunner is so crucial to that. And when you have different choices between like a Sicolas or a Daria or a Moonstone Vanguard, what are some of the heuristics you use to choose between which of those that you want to pledge?
So, despite this being a deck that is just all units and curves out all the time, I think it has a ton of play to it, figuring out what the correct line is. And I think that's super cool. And one of those decisions is what you pledge on the first turn, if you have a hand that has Sicolas and Daria, right? Because Daria's good in the late game, it's also a good defensive unit, which Sicolas doesn't do very well, but Sicolas is a much better card to just jam on turn 4, because if you follow it up with a Gunrunner or a Daria, that's a huge deal. So it actually just totally depends on what you think the matchup you're playing against is. If you go second, like, you get a little bit of information about what you're playing against, and you can make a decision based on that. And also, just what the rest of your hand is really informs what you pledge on turn 1. So, like, I don't even know that I can answer that question, sorry. agree. But I have to think about it hard at the beginning of every game and think, how is this game going to play out? You know, am I going to need to play Daria on 4 to block, or am I just going to play Cicalis and attack them? Or do I need this Gunrunner if I have Glasshoppers or maybe access to a Glasshopper via a merchant? Do I want to pledge this Gunrunner? Because Gunrunner is one of the key cards of the deck. You want it almost every game. So pledging it is kind of scary, except whatever card you pledge, you also get access to via the Glasshopper.
Totally.
So,
and I think Daria being able to pledge for either fire or time is pretty helpful too, especially given how Vault is in the deck. Being able to kind of build towards Heart of the Vault influence and how Daria shapes into that was something I felt I was thinking about too.
yeah, it's really tricky to play this deck optimally, I think. And that's very surprising given that similar decks in Magic, for example, I don't know if you played during like any sort of White Weenie or Humans deck that is all creatures in Magic. Those types of decks generally don't have a ton of play as far as sequencing goes. It's usually pretty clear what you want to do. This deck, you really have to think about it.
So in opening hands, prioritizing pledge, how much do you prioritize kind of an early game, like having Teacher of Humility or Amaran Stinger?
Like I said, I think that depends on what the rest of your hand looks like. If I can get a turn 2 Teacher on the play, I think I'll go a little bit out of my way to do that. And I think that most hands can play Stinger on turn 3, no matter like what your early game sequence is. So I'll prioritize Teacher, but only if I'm on the play. If I'm on the draw, like, Teacher's not particularly great, I don't think. Okay, so despite this being a deck of basically all units, it's actually very resilient to sweepers because of the Gunrunner's relic weapon and also having 8 charge units. That is huge. And usually when we see these types of big time decks, they're really weak to effects like Harsh Rule. But in this deck, if your opponent Harsh Rules you threaten 5 or more damage just by slamming a Cicalis. Maybe you play Cicalis plus Shugo Standard, you can do so much damage out of nowhere, and I think that's part of why this deck is so good and so resilient. And another way of interacting with time decks in the past have been units with deadly such as Corendon Merchant, just a 2-1 deadly, but that doesn't even do it against this deck because you have access to Gunrunner, which can eat up, well, the relic weapon can eat up small deadly units, and Daria on Cicalis, for example, if you use Daria on a unit and you have Gunrunner out, it becomes Deadly Quick Draw, which means that it can fight through any blocker. So this deck solves a lot of the weaknesses that time decks have traditionally had, while being extremely consistent and quite explosive as well. And I think that's why this deck is so good, and I think that is why the deck is the deck to beat this weekend.
Totally, and I think too, the other nice thing about the deck is its ability to deal with kind of bigger units. It's a little bit more on the
or just
side
not care, right? Because you have access to so much deadly. So, like, if your opponent just plays a Sandstorm Titan, or, like, even a Vara that you don't sacrifice a unit to, you're going to be able to fight through it eventually.
Totally, or I found I was able to use the Gunrunner Relic weapon on a Sandstorm Titan, or things that I feel like with other decks that have a little bit more aggro bent wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's talk about some of the tech that we've developed for this deck recently. I think that I obviously didn't come up with the idea of the Praxis Pledge deck. The first person I heard talking about it was Enrausch, but I think there are some things that I have done differently from other builds which have helped with its success. So let's talk about that a little. First of all, a time market. Some people are playing a fire market because of its perceived flexibility, and honestly, I just don't think that the fire market helps a ton. You don't really need that much for this deck to work. Just like even having another Glasshopper in the market is, I mean, it doesn't add anything to your deck that your main deck isn't already doing very well. And I think that's fine. I think that that's all you need for this. You just need it to be more consistent and get the Glasshopper as often as possible. And as far as the merchant body goes, the 3-2 Ixton Merchant, the 3-2 Overwhelm, is just not very useful. Whereas adding additional power with the Aurelian Merchant is a big deal for this deck. So I really prefer the time market. Another big thing is Shugo standards. Let me ask you something, Chai City. How often did you attack with a Daria unit, or Daria herself, and use Shugo standard just to deal an absurd amount of damage?
Yeah, no, that's huge, especially the Deadly Overwhelm combo and where just being able to do that to push in the last points of damage was enormous. So I had this game against GHP where it sort of looked like he had stabilized and I was kind of running out of units, but I had a 1/3 Deadly Glasshopper and he was at 4 life points. And I attacked. I think he had like 3 Hearts of the Vault out or something ridiculous because he had the Howling Peaks and cloned it. And so I only have this 1/3 Glasshopper. I attack, he blocks, and I'm able to use the Shugo standard to just push through the last 4 points of damage. But yeah, I think that's really important tech.
Yeah, it's a big deal. The other thing I love about Shugo Standard in this deck is that it's another modal card. It can act as a power early on, or it is the +4/+2 overwhelm effect that we want it to be late in the game. And just the flexibility of it just adds to the consistency of this deck. This deck is just absurdly consistent. And cards like Shugo Standard, cards that are power and something else are just so good to adding to the consistency.
Totally, yeah, and especially when, a lot of the time your units are going to have quick draw and some of them are going to have deadly. That all just works together so well.
Yeah. So also, some people have tried versions of this deck with Dawnwalker and Zen Initiation, and in the main deck, I cut all of those. I feel like Dawnwalker doesn't have that many things to trigger off of in this deck. Just 12 units, right? It's not really reliable, and it's not worth the cost of it. Dawnwalker is fighting with space for a lot of the 4-drop pledge units because you have the Glasshoppers to make those units cost 3, and it also fights with your merchants for space, and I just think that it's the most underwhelming out of all those. Also, very bad against Gunrunner.
Yeah, and tell me if you think this is right, but it seems like the Dawnwalkers you want when you're really heavy on the Xenon Initiation plan deck, it just more wants to kind of attack with a bunch of stuff and less fiddle around with that, except in certain situations where you can market for it.
Absolutely. I think that the Killer Dawnwalker is really powerful, but both cards on their own just aren't too spectacular. They're eating up space in your hand for the time until you're waiting to draw the other half, if that makes sense. And this deck doesn't even need to mess around with it, it's just so powerful. Alright, there's also an Apex Predator in this deck. That was actually just because I didn't know what to put in there, and occasionally I just wanted another pledge unit, so I put in Apex Predator without really thinking about it, and occasionally it's like pretty good. Did you get to Apex Predator anyone during the tournament?
It did. So one time, it sort of came up 2 points. One time in the top 8 match against GHP, Predator at a point where I had the mana to cast it. And it was a pretty full board, and I really, the decision between it and use the killer effect or try to prioritize the ambush was one I really thought about for a while, and I ended up getting cute and holding it back. So, he attacked with the Heart of the Vault and I think something else, and I used the ambush effect, hoping that I could ambush and then killer the next turn. But I think he had the 4 damage influence, the modal one. What is that called?
The display. That's still pretty good though. Like getting to ambush, like the ambush is real.
Yeah, no, for sure. So that was sort of hilarious. And then in the finals, I had mulligan once, and in the second hand, my only pledge unit was Apex. Pledged the Apex Predator, and that game was going sort of poorly. And near the end, I had a merchant, some merchant force, so I was sort of like, well, merchant for the Glasshopper, and maybe I can get this Apex Predator to stick. I think I was only at 5 or 6 power at the time and never got there, but that was sort of an interesting option to have.
Yeah, so it does come up occasionally. I'm not sure I'll be leaving it out. And the last piece of tech for this deck is Dissociate. And Dissociate is a market card I've been looking at for a while, trying to add it to decks, because I think it's pretty well positioned, does very well against sweepers, does well against problematic attachments. It doesn't kill attachments. Like, if you're planning for a long game, they're going to be able to replay it. But if you have a proactive strategy, it can delay the attachment long enough, or the attachment or the spell long enough for it to not matter, which I think is pretty powerful for a card that only costs 2. I like it. I really like it in the market, and have been trying to jam it into decks a lot.
Yeah, I've been sort of impressed with the number of situations where it comes up. So one place where I had success was against FTP, to use it as kind of a finisher when they had permafrosted like a Heart of the Vault or something, and then on a turn where you have enough influence and power to dissociate the permafrost on the Heart of the Vault and then play like a Daria and give it Berserk and Deadly or something like that. Just all of a sudden they're not going to have more turns to pay the more expensive cost on it. That was great. Or against the like Waystone's Destiny combo deck, having to dissociate there, I was like, oh, that's cool. Or
does that work
it's
when it
sort of
goes
nice to
back
have
to their
someone to deal with
hand? It doesn't play automatically.
I wasn't sure, but no, it didn't. So even though
Wow.
it had Destiny, I was like, well, I don't know what else to do. So I played Dissociate, and it was in their hands, and then they didn't have enough power to be able to cast it.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't even know that. Yeah,
I had a
it
E-Jug
does.
to deal with it.
It's a very flexible card, and it's a card that it's the type of card that you would only want one copy of, but it can be very good when you have that one copy. All right, so that's the deck. It's very good. Trust us on that. If you've been seeing it all over ladder, I think this is why maybe it was already all over ladder to begin with. But last Friday, I just was on a walk and I was jamming games with this deck, and I just kept on winning, and I kept on beating Ilya. And of course, Ilya says, okay, what the heck is going on here? Why do you keep on high rolling me with Praxis? And I said, no, this deck is actually for real. I looked in my match history. It turns out I was 13-1 with it. I posted the deck list in the Friends of Eternal Discord. Ilya took it about an hour later, or maybe 2 hours later. Ilya posts a screenshot of going 17-3 with this exact same deck list, and then the next time I'm on ladder, every other match is against Praxis Pledge. So that's kind of what happened there. I mean, I just think that this is the deck to beat. You have to be prepared for Praxis Pledge. Maybe Praxis Pledge is the deck that you want to be playing because it's so consistent and so resilient. But it does have its weaknesses. Let's talk about some of the cards that are actually good against Praxis Pledge. So, first of all, large deadly units do give the deck a bit of a problem. And by large deadly units, I'm talking about cards like Vara, Statue, Maiden, and Champion of Chaos. But I don't think that Stone Scar is actually good. Like, those cards might be good against Praxis Pledge, but I don't think the Stone Scar deck is particularly strong. And I just don't know a real home for those cards elsewhere. What do you think about these three cards against Praxis, Tri-City?
Yeah, so I think tricky but manageable. I feel like some of the other cards that we'll talk about, I'm not exactly sure what to do about it, but you gotta like, with Vara, maybe you have isn't kind of that useful after it's already done its thing, and so you can kind of sack that to Vara situationally, or maybe you can kind of combine an attack or a torch with a gun runner to deal with either of those. So it's not great, but I feel like those are manageable.
Yeah, eventually you're going to be able to fight through these. Any type of unit you're going to be able to fight through, except anything that has invulnerable to damage, such as Silverwing Courier. Silverwing
I
Courier
totally
went
forgot
from
about this card. Like like right after Homecoming came out, it was like I feel like super popular and everywhere, and then it seemed like it kind of disappeared for a while. And I think Saturday morning, while I was just sort of trying to test with the deck, someone played it, and I was like, "Oh right, this card. What the hell do I do against that?"
Yes, absolutely. I think people recognized from the Homecoming ECQ that the Huru non-pledge decks were just better than the Huru decks. So they just stopped playing pledge, and hence there are no more Silverwing Couriers. But it is very good against the deck. Deadly doesn't stop it. Quick Draw doesn't stop it. Large Stats doesn't stop it. There's just not anything this deck can do about it the way it's currently constructed, except for the one Purify in the market. So it's definitely a problem for this deck, but you have to be playing a deck that can play Silverwing Courier, and I just don't think that it has a great home right now.
Yeah, the version I was playing of the deck at the SPG tournament didn't have Purify in the market, but that seems like a mistake given the existence of Silverwing Courier.
Yeah, and
And I just think curious what your thoughts are on. I feel sort of the same way about Vargo too. That like I mean obviously different in terms of Praxis Pledge, but both those cards were kind of everywhere for a while and then disappeared. Do you think that just given the game warping effect that they have, that those are going to pop up more, just sort of not really workable?
well, I don't think that Fargo is going to pop up during a Praxis Pledge meta,
Mm.
but I think that what happened is that people are trying to play Vargo in these Ixtun decks, right? These Ixtun control decks that play Vargo then Harsh Rule, but they're not that great. Like, they're okay, but a lot of the time it's just worse and less consistent than Huru control, or I don't know. It just those decks kind of flopped from what I've heard from everyone that's playing them, they're just not very good, and I don't really understand why. But that's the impression that I've gotten from the people that have tried those types of decks, and I mean playing against them also. But you're right in that these cards were everywhere after Homecoming. Like, people were super excited about these cards existing in Homecoming and were ready to play them. And after the ECQ, they just kind of dropped off completely. So let's talk about the last card that I think is very good against this Praxis Pledge deck, and that's Hailstorm. 3 damage to everything, kills a lot of the units you play, while Sickles and Gunrunner are not very vulnerable in combat a lot of the time because you have ways of forcing them through. They are very weak to a sweeper such as Hailstorm, and I think that's a card that is one of the better tools you have to deal with this Praxis Pledge deck. Now, obviously, you have some units that survive through it, but I think that it costing 3 instead of 5 is a big deal. If you're sweeping on 5 and then Praxis just plays his charge unit, that's pretty bad. But if you sweep early on, right as they're trying to get established, I think that can be a big setback for this deck, and I wouldn't be surprised if Hailstorm decks did well in this coming ECQ to prey on Praxis Pledge.
Yeah, it makes sense. I just think the value of even narrowing down what the Praxis Pledge deck is throwing out there is huge. Just because a lot of the times against either Hero Control or against FTP in the late game, you just kind of have so many units out there that you can swarm them.
Other side you're going to be able to fight through what they present eventually.
Yeah, but being able to kind of funnel down the Praxis Pledge threats, and then maybe you just have some huge unit with Palace or something else, it seems like that makes it so much more manageable.
Yeah, that seems like the way to beat this deck. Alright, let's give our metagame breakdown. What decks do we think are going to be good in this coming ECQ? You could call this a tier list. I don't like the term a ton, but some people like the term, so sure. This is the official Friends of Eternal tier list. So, in tier 1, we have Praxis Pledge, as we've been discussing, Huru Control, and Genev Ramp. I think that these are the 3 decks to beat this weekend. The Huru Control deck, which only a couple people, it wasn't that popular leading into the last ECQ, but it was very successful in the hands of Graga PM and Zach Hill's ZDCH. And I think that it's really well positioned in the metagame. I think that probably if you want to beat Praxis, you have to play Hailstorms, play more Hailstorms, and perhaps, well, you have to play Hailstorms in the main deck, basically. But that's going to make the Huru Control weak to, basically every other deck. And Genev also is a deck that can play Hailstorm, because now we're seeing a lot of Aurelian Merchant builds, which lives through your own Hailstorm, which is a big deal. So I think that those are the 3 decks that are going to make up the tier 1 for this tournament, and those are going to be the 3 decks that you really have to have a good plan for, or maybe you just want to play these decks because they're very powerful and well positioned. Any comments on tier 1, Chi-City?
No, that makes sense to me, and that was what made up a lot of the top 8 at the SBG tournament. I feel like a lot of folks' reaction to both Praxis Pledge and Huru Control is like, hey, but I didn't really think it was going to stick around, but now it sort of has and looks like it's good. I think they're sort of similar in that way in folks' reaction, but it does seem like they're sticking around and that people have made some good improvements, and I would guess there'll be a ton of that in the ECQ.
Yeah. Tier 2 consists of Winchest. It did take some big nerfs in this most recent patch, but I still think it's very good. Some sort of armory deck. I think this is a Winchest deck, but obviously built much differently. Although I don't really know what the incentives for playing a Winchest armory deck are over playing Huru Control, but just the fact that it plays Sweepers, it plays Stormhalt Knife, it plays Throne Warden. I think that those are powerful cards and makes a powerful strategy in this metagame. We also have Huru Flyers and Haunted Highway. These are decks that I expect to be competitors in the ECQ, but not as competitive as the top 3. What do you think about our tier 2, Chi-City?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to you, the biggest question mark is Armory, and what does that mean?
Yeah, in some ways, that is a deck that didn't exist prior to the most recent batch of buffs, because if you were going to play some sort of armory deck, you might as well just play Winchest, which was very strong with the merchants before their nerf. Well, before one of their nerfs. Yeah, both of them had already been nerfed.
Buff to armory was like Ricano Artisan.
Yeah,
but I don't know how much that matters.
Yeah, I don't even know if you play Rakano Artisan, but just the fact that the other Winchest option got nerfed means that maybe the armory option is better now. I still think it's pretty unclear, and saying that tier 2 is more an uncertainty thing and something that I could see happening than a definite, like, this is a deck that I'm running to a ton in ladder, if that makes sense. But
Sure.
it is a deck that I think could be a competitor. I've played with it. It seems like a very powerful strategy.
I was just gonna say that the Huru control deck out of that armory stuff going on, a lot of them it seems like are playing Stormholt Knife and getting some utility out of that, and Throne Warden and some hammers and stuff. I wonder if is trying to do just kind of Huru control does a little bit better.
Do you think well, I actually think that it might do it a little worse, but it might do
Mm.
it better. I just don't know. But yes, they are very similar. All right, and our tier 3 plus comprises of basically everything else that you might see in a competitive setting. Reanimator, Stone Scar Aggro, which I don't think is going to be very good. X10 Control, which I don't think is going to be very good. Xenon, which I don't think is going to be very good. Having played against these decks, with and against these decks a fair amount, I just don't think I don't expect much out of them. Then we've also have Rakano Aggro, Rats, which actually got a top 4 in the last ECQ, although I think that was a bit more of an exception than an expected occurrence. Huru, TGP Pledge, Skycrag Aggro, Geoga Combo, Praxis Tokens, Temporal Control. I think that all these decks are a long shot to do well in the tournament. Do you have a pick from these decks that you think might be surprising, like a good underdog to root for, or do you think that all these decks are just not very likely to do well?
I think it's interesting to see if someone's able to have a Praxis tokens deck recently, but is that because it's not as good, or is that because people have just been kind of attracted to the shiny objects of the more recent stuff? I don't have a really good sense of that. Do you?
No, I don't know. I think that Praxis Tokens is still a powerful strategy, and it can always rear its ugly head. I don't
I think
know
it's
that
sort of
it's better than Pledge, but like has a lot of overlap with Pledge. So maybe there's some way to combine the two decks. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too to hear you say that you don't think Stone Scar Aggro and Xenon are very good, and I feel like that sort of means the balance that folks wanted to. I mean, maybe it hurt Winchest, and that was the really important effect of it, but I feel like there's a lot of enthusiasm and optimism about Xenon or Stone Scar or some other things, and it sounds like, and I agree with you, that that's not really happening.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about it. They tried. All right, let's talk about some of the spoilers that happened this week. We got spoilers that could be purchased from the store, and 15 were released. We're not going to go over all of them. We'll just go over some of the more exciting ones. And I think the most exciting spoiler we saw is Seal of Devotion. This does something that we do not have in the game yet. Seal of Devotion is a factionless power that says warp while you have no more than one typing. So if you're playing a mono faction deck, Seal of Devotion will have warp, and I think that is huge. Now, there might not be a huge payoff for mono faction decks. We are seeing a few of these 5-cost and then quintuple influence cards that are very powerful, that are payoff for being a monofaction deck. But as of now, with the cards that we have available, I don't think that there are many payoffs to being monofaction. Seal of Devotion, having 4 warp powers in your deck, that's absolutely huge. That is draw a card for free. You don't have to spend any power of it. You don't have to spend any power on it. It's always available when it's going to happen. The only cost is that you have to be playing a monofaction deck, and this doesn't help you hit your quintuple influence 5-drops on curve, but I still think that it's going to be very good in those monofaction decks. And whether those decks are good or not, I'm not sure, but I think that this is going to be a very powerful card in those decks and a pretty good payoff for it. What's your take on Seal of Devotion?
Yeah, I feel like folks are always there's always a couple of folks out there trying to make monofaction decks work. And the question of is this enough to get it there? Does it solve some of the problems? I'd be interested to hear your take. It just seems like the reason not to choose influence decks is because you just lose access to some of the most powerful cards, and does being able to warp a power get over that? I don't know. If you were to build a monofaction deck, what?
Well, I think that this is the only payoff that we get for monofaction decks. It's not worth it. But looking at other cards, I think we're going to start getting more payoffs for monofaction decks, and that makes it more appealing to do it. Because right now, the opportunity cost of not playing a monofaction deck is very low. Like, you can just play banners, crests and seats and have a lot of sources for like a single faction requirement of an off faction card, if that makes sense. Like, you can splash Torch in an otherwise mono shadow deck very, very easily, right? This card makes it so that you don't want to do that. And I think that's interesting, and that's a real payoff for being truly monofaction as opposed to being mostly monofaction. And I've had, like, you know, nearly monofaction Praxis decks that just plays Fire for Heart of the Vault. Or this type of payoff is something that would make it so that I wouldn't want to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'll admit I have a little bit of skepticism about whether or not it's enough, but maybe I'm just not appreciating Seal of Devotion enough.
Alright, speaking of monofaction cards, let's talk about Zumakin the Surveyor. It's a 5-cost quintuple time card. It's a 6/6 with Ambush and Warp. When Zumakin kills a unit, play a 1/1 Explorer. So this is, it looks like we are getting a cycle of quintuple faction requirement cards that cost 5, one for each faction. We already saw the Shadow card, which seemed very strong. This one also seems very, very strong. 6/6 Ambush feels like it's just going to kill almost anything that's attacking. And then you get a free 1/1. And it has Warp. So I think this card's very powerful. But actually, maybe not as powerful as the other quintuple faction cost cards are going to be, because time is so big about ramping. If you play, for example, Initiative Sands on turn 1, Aurelian Merchant on turn 2, you can't play Zumakin on turn 3 because you're not going to have quintuple time. So this is an extremely powerful card, but I'm also a little skeptical because it balks at one of Time's biggest strengths, which is its ability to ramp things out early.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it seems like, well, the Warp Ambush combo obviously has a lot of appeal. In order to take advantage of that, you kind of have to be set up right, and it's sort of situational, and so is that pop-up where you have the influence together and it's the right situation in order to be able to warp it off the top of your deck in order to ambush the attack?
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing. Everyone is going to think twice about attacking into quintuple time, 5 power, on curve, no play.
It will look really suspicious, yeah.
Yes.
I like that part.
They might attack into it once. Never again. Alright, let's talk about our next spoiler. This is Cryptic Master. Here we go. It's a 2-cost, single-time card. It's a 1/1, but it gets +1/+1 for each of your relics, and has Onslaught, play a Cryptic Etchings. I think this card is very strong. You can have a 3/3, a 4/4, who knows how big this can be in a relic deck without too much trouble. And the Onslaught is pretty good. I mean, if you play a Rat Cage on turn 1, attack with it, and then play Cryptic Master on turn 2, it's already a 3/3, and you get an additional rat from playing the Cryptic Etchings. I don't think it's too hard to imagine this card being powerful in the one deck that it would see play in.
Yeah, I think the Rats decks have really shown power of relic strategies in a way that at least I hadn't considered previously, and so this seems like exactly what they would want there, and slots in nicely.
Yeah, works really well with Severin also. So there's another card that is going to be powerful in its strategy. Let's talk about a card that might be powerful in a lot of strategies. Eclipse Dragon. I think this one is really, it seems really pushed to me, and I'm surprised that it's only rare, not legendary. It's 5-cost, double fire, 4/4, flying charge, quick draw dragon. At the start of the enemy turn, you get +3 power this turn, every single time. This card is a big deal, I think. We don't have too many flying charge units. The one that we did, that was good, got nerfed. Shoot, what's it called? Soulfire Drake. It used to be a 5/2 flying charge for 5. This one is a 4/4, so it doesn't die to a torch, it doesn't die to Defiance, it just doesn't die to the fast removal as easily. And the fact that you get +3 power this turn, I think that's a really big deal. What I found is that the fast cards that you want to play around, that are a big deal, cost 3. Things like Island's Choice, things like Display of Instinct, things like Display of Ambition. These are the fast spells that have a big effect. They cost 3. I think the fast spells that cost 2, with the exception of Annihilate, just in general are not as high impact. So you can do things like play this Eclipse Dragon, attack if your opponent doesn't have any way to interact with it, then on your opponent's turn, Display of Instinct in order to protect it, and then the next turn you can play either Palace or Howling Peaks in order to buff this up, get another one, and still be able to protect both of them on your opponent's turn. And I think that is huge. This card strikes fear in my heart already, and we haven't even played against it yet.
I love Soulfire Drake back at the original cost, so I'm super down with anything that's like that. And in a world of sites, it seems like this would be so useful to be able to take those out.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. This takes down every site in the game, right? No site has more than 4 health. This will take it down. So your opponent plays a site, you play Eclipse Dragon, kaboom, it's gone. And you can protect it and then play your own sites. So we'll see. We'll see what this does in the metagame.
Seems super cool.
Okay, our next spoiler, this is another niche card, I would say. Gust Rider. It's a 1/1 flying for 1 with a primal requirement. It says Onslaught, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. Now, obviously, if you play this on turn 1, you're not going to have that Onslaught. But it's not too hard to imagine a situation in which you're playing a Flyers deck, and you attack, and then you get to play Gust Rider and draw 2 and discard 2. This seems like a powerful card. In Magic, of course, there are cards that cost 1 that say draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards, and those cards are very powerful. Are you familiar with Faithless Looting and Careful Study, and how often they've been played in powerful formats?
For sure.
Yeah. So this does that effect attached to a 1/1. Granted, the effect is conditional, but there are just a lot more units in Eternal that are relevant. So this seems really powerful at enabling void strategies, or enabling discard, or enabling echo. It just seems like this is going to be a great enabler, and while we might not have a shell for it right away, I think that this is going to enable a lot of powerful strategies.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think through how Onslaught works with some of the discard strategies. So what's a strategy where in the graveyard, but you're also attacking? I mean, I guess Reanimator, there's no reason why you couldn't attack with those units, but it seems like that deck is mostly kind of hanging back.
Well, sure, but like if you have a card that says draw 2, discard 2 in Reanimator, it's worth throwing away one of your units. And that deck has a lot of 2-drops. Maybe you could just get to attack on an empty board with your 2-drop.
No, totally, that makes sense. It's interesting.
All right. I'm really excited to see what that card can do. All right, the last spoiler that we're going to talk about here is Reread. It costs 2 and has a primal influence. Draw a spell from your void. It gets void bound. So you get to rebuy a card from your void for the cost of 2, and then you can't use it again. I think this is interesting. I don't think it's going to be powerful, at least not yet. We don't have a ton of ways of modifying spells with things like Echo or cost reduction or stuff like that. But I think that given the right enablers, I think this card could be pretty powerful.
Yeah, so what's the real, like, amazing target that you would use for this?
Well, I think the idea is that you would somehow decrease the cost of a card like Riddle Game, which draws a ton of cards. And then, so you might play a Riddle Game, then, a bunch of cards that generate power, and then you would reread your Riddle Game and then draw more cards and etc. and go off that way and somehow kill your opponent on that turn with some sort of Storm-like combo. That's just something that I'm conceiving of as a possibility. In reality, it certainly doesn't exist right now, and I don't know how much it is going to exist in the future, but like that's just what I see this card's application. You want to use it on a card that's modified, whether it be something like Echo or Destiny or cost reduction. Yeah, that's what I've got for this one. I guess it does work reasonably well with like Diogo's Destiny ability, but I don't think that that's reliable enough to jam this card in the deck, at least not.
I'm sure Isomorphic will come up with something really cool to do with
it. Yeah, I can only wait. All right, let's go on to the last segment of today's show. Sunny's not having it. Spoilers as a commodity. I just want to give my take on spoilers being something that you can purchase from the Influence Store. I think it's totally fine. I mean, some people seem to be a little bit upset about this. Not, like, outraged upset, but don't think it's a good thing. But, I mean, I think it's a cool use of the Influence Store. It means that you've been interacting with Eternal a bunch, and now you have a chance to spoil a card, which is something that the average person can't do in many other card games. Like, for example, thinking of Magic the Gathering, I would never have a chance to spoil a card, and here, anyone can just buy this from the Influence Store. Now, that does come with the caveat of there's only so many spoilers, and they sold out extremely quickly. But, I mean, I think that's just a reality of how spoilers are going to work. Like, they can't just have an endless supply of spoilers. Otherwise, we'd know the entire set within a day, right? Everyone would just buy all the spoilers from the set, and then we'd know all of them. So being able to release them in a controlled fashion, I think, is totally fine and probably for the better. I just think that it's cool that people can buy spoilers. I don't have a problem with the way that these are being distributed. I think it's a good way to spend influence, similar to card design and card back design. So, I just think that this is a good addition to the influence store.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the concept. They have an influence store. It makes sense that they want to figure out ways to use it. I think the only missed opportunity is I'm not sure it maximizes the use and the personality of some of the content creators. So, like, for example, if there's a Yeti card, that should be spoiled by Bassoon Buffoon. Like, he'll be super happy about it. He'll be excited. And so I think there's something to trying to match up the card with the right content creator as opposed to just sort of whatever the luck of the influence store is.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe they have those planned, maybe not. I mean, based on what we've seen in the past, they have a couple spoilers that they give to community members, but not a ton. I think it would be cool for them to do a little more of that. Especially since, I don't know about you, but I've definitely seen a bunch of Direwolf people hanging out in streams, checking out what the content creators are doing. So, I mean, they know people's personalities. It definitely would be cool to see them give on-theme spoilers to them. Alright, that does it for today's topics. Chicity, do you have anything you would like to add before we say goodbye to everyone?
No, thanks for bringing me on the cast, and thanks for all the support through Friends of Eternal. Like I said at the beginning, I run a nonprofit, and I've sort of been thinking about the idea of maybe having a charity tournament as a small fundraiser. If anybody has ideas about how to do that, or you would like to assist with that, please feel free to reach out to me on Discord or in game or any place where you can find me.
Yeah, and thanks for being on the show. It's been great to have you. And let me just say that also, hoodies and shirts are up on the Inked Gaming website. If you want to represent Friends of Eternal, you can get some very high quality apparel on Inked Gaming. My shirt and hoodie just came in today, and I can't wait to wear the shirt on stream. I mean, being in the Bay Area, I'm not going to be able to wear a hoodie for several months, but I am so excited to start wearing that shirt on stream tomorrow. And it looks great. It feels great. I am super psyched that this is now a reality. So if you want to buy a hoodie or a shirt, you can check out the Friends of Eternal Discord. There's some information and team announcements. Or you can go to my channel, twitch.tv/Sunyveil, and type in exclamation point hoodie, and you'll be given a link to how you can buy it. Anyway, that'll be it for us this week. Next week, we're going to have a rundown of the ECQ and any new spoilers we have from the new set Dark Frontier. So stay tuned. Thanks for listening. We hope to see you next time. And until then, we will see you in the Friend Zone. Friends of Eternal is an inclusive community-based team dedicated to self-improvement and helping others do the same. We accept all newcomers to our ranks, so if the team environment appeals to you, or if you just think we're cool and want to hang out with us, we're happy to have you. All you have to do is go to my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Sunyveil, and type in !FE, and there you will find more information on how to join the Discord and be a fully fledged member of the team. Thanks again so much for listening, and until next time, we will see you in the Friend Zone.